Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 251 to 260. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. An hour and a half had passed since Glancis and Christina left the club, and in that time Klein received 2 other clients. Maybe this way I can get enough funds for doing divinations for others. Klein thought with a small smile as he got up from his seat, put on his hat, grabbed his cane, and walked towards the exit of the club. At this moment, Christina entered accompanied by the young Megos, who was wearing a sun hat. Christina saw Klein and immediately approached him. Mr. Moretti, you said that you could try to guess Lenevis's location if there was anything that belonged to him. She asked softly. That's right. Klein nodded. Christina breathed a sigh of relief and asked with a serious tone. So is his child something that belongs to him? Huh. Klein was momentarily a bit lost. Christina didn't notice the seer's blank expression. She took a quick peek at the receptionist Angelica over the reception desk. Lowering her voice, she said. I mean Lenevis's child. She extended her hand to point at the young Megos, who was a bit away from them and was quietly singing a song. This is my niece, Megos. Her mother is my older sister. I am very sorry and regretful for thinking that Lenevis was a sweet and outstanding young man back then. I introduced Megos, who was single, to Lenevis. Then they both became lovers. Megos's parents were also happy with Lenevis at the beginning, the whole family was. The whole family invested in Lenevis's company, some more and some less, but we all got scammed by him. Luckily, the family is not in danger and there is hope to recover, but it will take a long time, she said regretfully, and then sighed and added with venom. Lenevis fled with over £10,000 in his pockets. She then shook her head slightly and continued. I'm getting off topic. We believe in the god of steam and machinery, not in the Lord of Storms. We do not believe in chastity before marriage. We do not blame Megos and even feel sorry for her. The existence of the child does make things difficult though, especially having such a father. £10,000. Oh goddess, if you manage that money you can live your whole life without working. Klein was stunned at the amount of money Lenevis managed to steal. But that astonishment quickly turned to anger. He took advantage of the people who trusted him both financially and sexually. Klein looked at the silent Megos, who was standing next to Christina. She looked depressed yet calm. What a disgusting snake. He even managed to escape successfully. Klein inwardly insulted Lenevis and said after some thought. If it is a child that has already been born, then it is possible to use the child as a medium. But unfortunately, this will require waiting a few months. Yes, this may be what the divination earlier referred to. Be patient and wait persistently without being greedy, then you will have the opportunity of seeing the sunlight. A few months. Christina muttered to herself as she shook her head. No, after all this time, even if we find Lenevis, we won't be able to get our money back. She looked sideways at Megos. His voice lowered unconsciously. Do you have something that he carried with him before? No, Megos answered gently. But then her honey eyes lit up when she remembered something. Will the ring he gave me count? Must be something he's been carrying around for a long time. Klein shook his head. Christina was silent for a few seconds. She then turned to see Megos and said. You have to make a decision. I think that taking this child will only make your future rough and painful. Are you going to tell him that his father was a con man who took money from many people, including his mother? It's time to go to the clinic, to the hospital. Besides, this can help us find Lenevis, and recover what we lost. Hey, isn't that a bit of a hardcore method? Klein thought to himself, but did not give his opinion because it was not his place. I never thought I'd use a fetus as a divination aid. Klein lampooned a bit. Magus's expression quickly turned sour and she glared at her aunt while putting both hands on her stomach as if protecting it. I can't believe you could say that, aunt. He will be different from his father. He will be a considerate and friendly boy. He will kick me lightly every day, telling me his mood. He hums songs, whistles, and tells me stories to help me sleep. Klein listened and suddenly noticed something strange. Ads by PubFuture. Perhaps now she has mental problems due to the incident. Klein put his right hand to his glabella. He pretended to massage it to soothe his weariness. But at that moment Megos turned around and stormed out of the club, leaving only one sentence. I won't stay here to listen to how you want to hurt my baby. I'm out. Klein was caught off guard by this sudden reaction that he forgot to activate his spirit vision. He watched helplessly as Megos left the club and stormed down the stairs. Christina watched this stunned. She turned to see Klein and quickly said. Sorry, Mr. Moretti. I'm sorry to have bothered you, we'll be looking for something that Lenevis carried with him all the time. Saying that, Christina didn't expect a response from the seer. She turned around and left the club and went downstairs screaming for her niece to wait for her. Klein, seeing all this, could only sigh as he shook his head. This reminds me of a case I saw in a movie. The mother also reacted like this to the suggestion to abort the baby. Finding nothing unusual in Megos's reaction, Klein just left the club. Somewhere in Tingen City, in a dark room, a dark blonde man was finishing writing in his notebook before putting the pen in a container and sealing it. Too close. Ins Zhengwil sighed in relief as he wiped the sweat from his forehead and sighed. Looking down at the notebook, he read what the quill had written and he had barely been able to stop it. The last words were written with less force and the next paragraph was written with powerful and incredible strokes, as if the writer was incredulous. Ads by PubFuture. That was too close. Ins Zhengwil thought heavily as he squeezed hard on the wooden table, almost breaking it. He tried to change everything so that Megos would never meet Klein Moretti, but that was impossible. No matter how hard he tried, the two of them would end up meeting at the club. And he discovered that he could only slightly change paragraphs 9 and 11. So with what little he could change, he managed to save the plan from being discovered. And finally, even though it would suffer even more, he added an extra paragraph. Looking at the last sentence, Ins Zhengwil was very tempted to write that Klein Moretti met with an accident and died. But he contained that desire and closed the notebook and put it in his jacket pocket. I know what you're planning, Sesimir, and I won't fall. Ins Zhengwil thought darkly. If Klein died suddenly, no matter the circumstance, Ins Zhengwil knew that Sesimir would have enough evidence to call in more reinforcements. That was why Krestet Sesimir had told the Nighthawks to carry on with their work as normal. To attract Ins Zhengwil's hand, he planned to use Klein Moretti as bait. No matter how much I want to kill that rat, for now he is untouchable. Ins thought with hate when suddenly an evil smile grew on his face. But that doesn't mean the other Nighthawks are, he murmured with a short laugh. If he was careful, he could make their deaths look like work accidents. But at that moment, the mirror surface of the room turned dark, as if there were countless objects and layers of endless spaces hidden within it. From this strange space, Panatia emerged gracefully, still wearing her pure white robe and her pulled back black hair. The mirror behind her returned to normal and reflected her sensual figure. Ins Zhengwil had to swallow as he saw how the woman's waist was sensually outlined by her robe. She looked at Ins Zhengwil and smiled softly. If you think I'll sleep here, then you really have lost your mind, she teased, but seeing that Ins Zhengwil just looked at her annoyed, she just sighed. Not a kiss, even a hi, you're a lousy lover, she said with fake sadness before looking behind the man. At least your quill is excited to see me, she teased, and Ins Zhengwil's eyes widened in horror. Touching his pocket, he realized that his notebook had disappeared. He turned around and saw how the quill is writing in the notebook. He lunged forward and grabbed the quill before it could write anything else. Looking down, he quickly read what the pen had written. Fuck. Cursing, he turned to Panatia and said, "We are leaving." Panatia sighed sadly as she walked to the mirror that turned dark again, being quickly followed by Ins Zhengwil, who grabbed a bag next to the bed. And that I had barely arrived, she said sadly as she stepped to the side of the mirror. She extended her arm toward the mirror as if giving way to a lady. Ins Zhengwil could only bite his tongue and entered the mirror, being followed by a smiling Panatia who snapped her fingers before entering, and the room was engulfed in an illusory black fire that disappeared after 3 seconds. The mirror returned to normal, reflecting the darkness of the room. A few seconds later, a cold air rushed through the room, making the curtains swirl slightly. This lasted only a few seconds and then disappeared. Ads by PubFuture. Backland, 11:30 p.m. An alert Charlotte clenched the charm in his hand as he followed closely behind a calm Adrian. Charlotte wore simple pants along with a white shirt and a gray jacket. And a bucket hat on his head. While on the other hand, Adrian wore black pants and a brown jacket. He had the hood of his jacket up to hide his red hair. Boss, where are we going? Charlotte asked, looking alert for anything strange. Adrian kept his eyes straight ahead and responded. You're on the team now, remember? I have to introduce you to the other members. Charlotte's expression soured momentarily, but he quickly recovered. So it's like that, the purple-eyed man muttered more to himself than to Adrian. He discreetly took out another 2 charms from his pocket and squeezed them into his right hand. Could you tell me more about my new teammates, boss? Charlotte asked curiously. He really has to improve how he hides the charms. Flora commented upon seeing the poor attempt the young man made. Adrian smiled as he answered. Of course, Charlotte, For now there aren't many of us, but that will be solved with time. How many exactly, boss? Charlotte asked with a frown. Counting you now, we are 5. Adrian answered calmly while Charlotte only nodded slightly. Charlotte narrowed his eyes slightly. I think I overestimated the team a bit if there are so few, he thought to himself, but then shook his head. As if he could read his mind, Adrian responded. You don't have to worry about the strength of the team. We are all Beyonders and very competent, we can protect ourselves. Given this information, the purple-eyed man was taken by surprise. All, he couldn't help but ask. Adrian nodded with a smile. All, Charlotte was lost in his thoughts. If all the members of the team are Beyonders, that's a considerable force. To raise so many Beyonders, according to Uncle's notes, a lot of money is needed and someone strong to control and guide them. He looked at Adrian's back and nodded slightly. It makes sense that it would be so, having such a monster as a boss. I doubt someone like him would accept someone weak in his team. He still remembered the intensity of the flame deep within the etheric body of the man in front of him. He was sure that if Adrian wanted, he could kill him and he couldn't do anything to defend himself. Knowing this did not scare him, quite the opposite. Ads by PubFuture. It made him much more excited. This just makes me want to follow this man even more, he thought with a shaky smile as he followed Adrian. Watching out of the corner of his eye what Charlotte was doing, Adrian could only sigh internally as he returned his attention to the front. I always get the weirdos. In the basement of a private warehouse. Huff huff. Sweat fell from her forehead and her breathing was rough. Her wavy black-green hair was tied in a ponytail and her bright brown eyes gazed intently at a very tall woman who was looking at her seriously. Come on, Hazel, if you want to complete the challenge you have to be faster than this. Sasha said with a smile as she took a few steps to the side. Clink clink. There were small silver bells tied to her waist with a red cord. Gulping in breaths, Hazel tried to get up but fell to one knee. Give me a moment, she said tiredly as she fell to the ground. At that, Sasha sighed and walked towards the green-haired girl. After moving so much you shouldn't sit down, get up and walk, she advised with a smile, her serious expression gone. Sasha stopped next to Hazel and held out her hand to her. Yes, I understand, Hazel said between breaths as she extended her left hand towards Sasha's. But before touching her, she threw dirt at Sasha's eyes with her right hand while kicking with her left leg at her face. When she did that, Sasha's expression turned serious, and moving her head to the side she dodged the handful of dirt and with her right arm blocked the kick. Hazel didn't stop but using her hand as support, she did a 360-degree turn and tried to kick her with her other leg, but this time Sasha stepped back and dodged the kick. Taking advantage of the inertia of her kick, Hazel got up and jumped back several times, and gave Sasha a serious look. That was a good move. But you have to be faster than that, Sasha said with a smile at the green-haired girl's dirty trick. In the Beyonder world, there is no honor, so the more dirty tricks you have the better. At the compliment, Hazel smiled mischievously as she extended her left fist. Thanks Sasha, but I think you dropped this. She then opened her hand. Clink clink. Now the little silver bells were in her control. Sasha just looked at her side and seeing that the bells weren't there she just laughed with a big smile. You're getting faster every time, I didn't even see when you took them. Hazel smiled too but without showing her teeth, showing her noble grace. She tossed the bells to Sasha who caught them with extreme ease with a smile without taking her gaze from Hazel. This time it took you 10 minutes. How about we go for 7? Sasha asked with a smile, but before Hazel could say anything, applause rang out. Ads by PubFuture. Clap clap clap. I'm glad to see that you guys are getting along so well, you already look like sisters. Adrian said with a smile as he entered through a hidden door. Boss. Teacher. Sasha and Hazel respectively called, happy to see Adrian, but just as they were walking towards him Adrian raised his hand to stop them. Wait a minute, we have a guest and I wouldn't want to make him nervous by having so many people around him, he said calmly, and the faces of both women lit up in understanding. The first to speak was Sasha. So he accepted? She asked with a bit of excitement. Hazel on her side huffed in annoyance as she crossed her arms. Adrian just smiled as he nodded. Ladies, I present to you Charlotte, the new member of the team. He introduced, and a suspicious Charlotte also came out of the hidden door. Treat him well. He smiled. Sasha was the first to move. She calmly walked up to Charlotte and held out her hand to him. Nice to meet you, Charlotte. I'm Sasha Strauss and I'm a pugilist. Charlotte listened to the presentation surprised and looked at Sasha as if she had grown another head. Did she really tell me her pathway just like that? He thought a little stunned, but controlling himself, he took her hand. Charlotte Silk, Mystery Prior. He returned the greeting and Sasha's smile grew. I hope we get along very well, she finished with a smile, separating her hand from the purple-eyed man who nodded. Charlotte turned to look at Hazel, who snorted but still reached out to him and held out her hand. My name is Hazel, a marauder. Charlotte took her hand and nodded. He then looked around and raising an eyebrow asked. Boss, didn't you say that we are 5? Where is the missing one? Oh right, Nathan isn't in Backland right now. If I'm not mistaken, the circus should be in Wach County. Adrian responded calmly as he turned to look at Sasha, who nodded in confirmation. What is he doing in Wach County? Charlotte couldn't help but ask. Clowning around and hiding. Adrian responded with a mischievous smile, and this confused Charlotte. Faced with Adrian's attitude, Sasha just rolled her eyes and answered Charlotte's question. He's out of Backland to avoid a few things, but he should be back the first week of September. At that, Charlotte just nodded, grateful to the woman. He wouldn't ask any more because he still didn't have the confidence to ask those things. He moved a little to face the three of them and have them in view. He looked around the training ground and returning his attention to the rest of the team, he asked. So what do we do now? Adrian smiled. We will tell you how to digest the potion. When he said that, he felt like something was squeezing him hard, but he still kept his smile. To digest, Charlotte repeated, confused. Despite feeling like something deep in his body was slowly tightening, Adrian still kept his smile. He turned to see Sasha and calmly said, Sasha, would you do us the honor of explaining the method and the characteristics to Charlotte? The squeeze he felt increased, but again Adrian kept his expression without showing any change. The pain I felt when resurrecting is greater than that of this useless contract. In comparison, the bite of a mosquito hurts more, the redhead thought as he leaned against a pillar from the training ground and crossed his arms over his chest. Sasha nodded with a smile. Of course, boss, it would be my honor. Sasha turned to look at Charlotte and her expression turned serious. What is this sudden change of personality? Is this really the same smiling woman from before? Charlotte thought as he unconsciously straightened his back. Hazel on the other side didn't say anything, she only moved until she was next to Adrian and also leaned against the pillar. Using the same pose as Adrian. Adrian watched this out of the corner of his eye and couldn't help but feel a little warm inside. She may be an arrogant brat, but she's still a kid. Flora commented calmly. And she was right, Hazel had just turned 17 last May. This contract is seriously annoying. Shouldn't Hunter's Halo block its influence on me because it affects my soul? Perhaps it broke when I wasn't looking. The redhead joked a bit but wasted no time in returning to the topic. No, I don't think it works like that. I signed the contract at my own will, so Hunter's Halo can't do anything. Unless I don't endanger my soul, the robe won't work. An idea struck him like a bolt of lightning that caused the corners of the redhead's lips to rise slightly. And what if I force it to act? Although it is dangerous, I can feel that the influence of the contract is not as strong as when I was a provoker or when I had just advanced to pyromaniac. The redhead could feel that if he advanced to sequence 5 he could easily break the contract without having to worry too much about the backlash of doing so. But he wouldn't wait that long, he didn't like having a snake suffocate him for saying something that shouldn't be said. When I fully digest the potion I can try to break the contract and force Hunter's Halo to act. Now I can only have an idea of what would happen if I broke it, but I'm sure that one of the things that will be hit will be my soul, just what Hunter's Halo protects. Adrian's smile turned sharp. Now is dangerous because I can feel that the backlash will still be very strong, and if I try to break it now it will be a very bad idea. Only by digesting the potion I will be able to bear it and free myself from this crap. Maybe advancing to conspirator would be safer, but that means less chance for Hunter's Halo to active. The best time will be when pyromaniac is digested. With a plan ahead, Adrian looked at Charlotte, who was still silent, trying to understand what he had said. He chuckled quietly at this, he pulled back his hood and let his red hair run free. Running a hand through his hair and feeling its softness, the redhead looked at the young man and said, "Did you manage to understand what Sasha said, or do you need her to repeat it again?" Charlotte tensed for a few seconds before shaking his head slightly. "No need, I understood what she said. Then what you should focus on now is digesting the potion before advancing to Melee Scholar," Adrian said before turning to Sasha. "How are you doing with the potion?" Sasha smirked and raising her arm she flexed it, showing her big muscles. "I'm doing very well, boss. At the rate I'm going I should be able to digest it before the end of the year." "That's good. Good job, Sasha," Adrian praised honestly. "Thanks, boss." The redhead looked away from the happy Sasha and turned to look at Hazel, who was slightly pursing her lips. Ads by PubFuture. What about you, Hazel? How is your potion coming? Hazel's expression brightened quite a bit, but maintaining her noble grace, she only allowed herself to smile. Teacher, since I've been with you, the speed of digestion of the potion has accelerated. This shows me that your teaching methods are vastly superior to Teacher Flora's. Saying that, Hazel was silent for a few seconds, as if she had realized that she said something rude to an old person. The corners of Adrian's lips turned up in amusement. Ungrateful brat. Flora yelled in annoyance at the insult Hazel had unintentionally thrown at her. Recovering herself, the noble continued as if nothing had happened. I'm sure I'll be able to fully digest it in 2 more weeks at the most. That's good. Good job, Hazel. The redhead praised, and Hazel beamed proudly. She then turned to see a thinking Charlotte and smirked at him. Charlotte, who was still processing the information from earlier, was caught off guard by this and looked at Hazel in confusion, but before he could say anything, Adrian spoke. How have you been holding up the ravings? Excuse me, Charlotte asked, not understanding. Adrian just shrugged and said, you know, the ravings. The ravings you should be listening to every once in a while from a pervert who likes to whisper in people's ears. Any bells ring? Understanding flashed in Charlotte's eyes as he stared at Adrian in astonishment. How do you know? At Charlotte's outburst, Sasha and Hazel went on guard, but Adrian only raised an eyebrow. Every Beander who has had time in this world knows the specialty of the mystery prior. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and Charlotte closed his mouth. Adrian looked at Sasha and Hazel, and with a hand signal, they calmed down. He looked at Charlotte. Let's do this again. How are you doing with the ravings? Charlotte looked seriously at Adrian. After a few seconds, he answered. I'm holding up fine. It only had come once or twice every 2 months so far, and as long as I ignore it, it goes away after about 5 minutes normally. He continued. Do you know what the ravings I'm hearing are? Adrian nodded calmly. It's not exactly ravings, the correct way to call it would be the whispering of a peeking pervert. He had said it with extreme naturalness and without importance. This naturalness quite took everyone present by surprise, much more Charlotte. What? Charlotte asked with a frown, his mind working overtime. Sasha and Hazel also looked at Adrian, not understanding what he said. Not wanting to upset the young man further, Adrian explained. What you are hearing are the whispers of an evil god. Charlotte's brain shorted out, as did Sasha's and Hazel's. An evil god, Charlotte unconsciously repeated, and Adrian nodded. More specifically, the top of your pathway. He has a habit of whispering and watching the mystery priors in their promotions, as well as whispering information to them. If you're wondering, the answer is no. The knowledge and information he whispers are pure and without any form of corruption, it's just that the way he delivers it is the worst. I don't know if you're interested in knowing his name. He is called Hidden Sage, but I affectionately call him Perverted Whisperer. The trio was looking at Adrian as if he had gone completely crazy. Ads by PubFuture. That guy had just insulted a god. And not just one insult, but several. From not using he or they with God, and even giving a god a nickname. Hey, just because you're the blessed of a god doesn't give you the right to insult another. Flora screamed in disbelief. She only hoped she wouldn't be struck down by lightning in the form of divine retribution for the blasphemy Adrian had just committed. An evil god is still a god, Adrian. You can't just insult them. Flora yelled, and Adrian just shrugged. The people present took a while to recover, and when they did, they looked at Adrian with different emotions ranging from surprise, respect, admiration, and disbelief. Recovering himself, Charlotte asked with some fear. Mr. Adrian, what will happen to me when I fail to understand the information from the Hidden Sage? He wasn't crazy enough to call a god by the nickname Adrian had given him. That was dancing with death. The usual thing. You'll lose control, turning into a monster, or you'll die. Adrian said calmly, and Charlotte paled. Why uncle would leave me the formula for such a dangerous path? Didn't he know the danger that this path had? Charlotte thought, unable to help but feel betrayed. He lowered his head and clenched his teeth and fists tightly. Seeing how the young man was, Adrian just sighed and walked up to the young man and placed his hand on his shoulder, making him look at him. Since you agreed to join this team, you will never have to worry about that happening, because it never will, he said confidently, and Charlotte looked at him in astonishment. How would you do that? He couldn't help but ask that, and Adrian smiled. Do you believe in any god? Like the Evernight goddess, Lord of Storms, or God of Steam and Machinery, or any of the other 4? Even now he continues to insult the gods. Charlotte thought dazedly before shaking his head. No, boss. My family has never believed in any god for as long as I can remember, and the only times I have prayed to them have been for the making of charms and rituals. When he answered, he got an idea of what the redhead wanted to do and he looked at him seriously. Boss, do you want me to pray to one of the 7 righteous gods to receive their protection when the hidden sage's whispers come? At this, Adrian nodded with a soft smile and answered. That would be for the best, but what will happen is that you will be ignored. The gods will not help you because you are not useful to them. Why would they help you without receiving anything in return? Saying that, Adrian shook his head. You can try if you want, but exactly what I said will happen. At that time you will be alone and waiting for your death for failing to process the information he whispered to you, the redhead said regretfully, but then smiled. But don't worry, I have the perfect solution to your problem. Which is, boss? Charlotte asked eagerly. What Adrian had said had scared the hell out of him, and now he was afraid of when the next whisper would come. Could he take it? Would he survive? Seeing the clear anxiety Charlotte had, Adrian smiled victoriously within himself. He used the corner of his eye and watched as Sasha and Hazel were also uncomfortable. I really want to know how different a conspirator is from a pyromaniac. Adrian thought, and looking into Charlotte's scared purple eyes, he smiled softly and his gaze relaxed. He looked at Sasha and Hazel and said calmly and believingly, I would like to speak to you about my lord. The trio looked confused at Adrian, who kept his smile. Long live gaslighting. Is it okay to spread the belief of your god like this? Flora thought worriedly as she saw what Adrian had done, but quickly cut her thoughts short and entered cogitation. She would not meddle in God's business. The words that Adrian had spoken somewhat confused everyone present in the training ground. Hazel looked at Adrian with a slightly raised eyebrow while Sasha looked a little nervous at the man. Don't tell me that boss is the believer of an evil god. But he's never acted crazy or shown any sign of it. Sasha thought seriously as she discreetly moved to Hazel's side. It's not that she didn't trust the man who saved her and Nathan's lives, it was just a precaution. But when she did this, she couldn't help but be embarrassed and ashamed. Adrian saved my life several times, and this is how I repay him. And after all we went through, am I seriously gonna treat him with this distrust without letting him explain himself? Her experience working at the Church of the God of Combat and her experience at Adrian's side collided. If she was still in the church, she would have reported him and arrested 5 seconds ago, but that was no longer the case. She was no longer part of the church but on Adrian's team alongside Nathan. Looking at her boss, she only sighed slightly and relaxed her guard a bit. This was the least the boss deserved. She would let him explain and only then she would decide after hearing everything. I only ask that it's not the true creator or the primordial demoness, boss, Sasha thought heavily as she looked at the redhead. Looking at the giantess's reaction, Adrian could only inwardly sigh in relief. The person I was more worried about would react the strongest is calm. While I can see that this bothers you, Sasha, I can also see you have given me a chance. That's good, hee. I think the relationship I formed with them is stronger than I gave it credit for. The redhead thought with relief as he glanced at Sasha. Adrian glanced at this out of the corner of his eye but just kept his expression relaxed. Although I'm a bit surprised that Hazel is so calm, the redhead looked at the aforementioned. The noblewoman kept the same posture as before, leaning against the pillar with her arms crossed. She looked calm but a little confused. Maybe it's because she doesn't know how dangerous it is, or because she trusts me a lot. This thought made him suppress an amused chuckle. What a loving student, you make this wretch blush. Adrian then looked at Charlotte, who was standing with his head slightly lowered and his brow furrowed in deep thought. This lasted for several seconds that felt like forever to Adrian. But before the atmosphere in the room turned heavy and it entered a dangerous area, Charlotte looked up and nodded. Tell me about this lord, boss. Adrian's expression brightened considerably, and he nodded gently, his red eyes shining with faith like rubies reflecting sunlight. Adrian raised his hands and brought them together in front of his lips in a prayerful posture. He closed his eyes and bringing his hands up to almost touch his pink lips, he said with a calm smile. Let me tell you about the great and magnificent Scarlet Monarch. Around the redhead the trio swore they could see an illusory halo. It was as if Adrian had become a saint. Separating his hands without haste, he pointed to some chairs to the side and said, We'd better sit down, I have a lot to tell you. Now the quartet was seated. Sasha and Hazel were sitting together and Charlotte was a little further away from them. Ads by PubFuture. Facing them was a calm Adrian who watched them with a smile, his hands resting on his thick thighs. Sasha was still uncomfortable but less than before. Adrian noticed this and not wanting to miss the opportunity, he started his performance. Before I tell you about my lord, I would first like to tell you how I was saved by him. Several months ago, I was in a situation that should have killed me. I was kidnapped by the Rose School of Thought along with several others in Balam. We were transported by ship to an unknown destination but with a clear motive, to be sacrificed to the evil god this organization believes, the Mother Tree of Desire. And they had no problem reminding us of that. The ship's captain killed and consumed a man in front of us until he left only a pile of flesh and blood. When he said the last, his voice died and his head lowered. Boss. Sasha muttered worriedly. I never thought that the boss went through all that. Since I met him he always seemed strong and confident, that nothing scared him and he would step on whoever got in his way. The image of a frightened Adrian seemed so foreign to her that it even made her stomach churn. Knowing that even the boss can feel fear too. I don't know why but it makes him look more human. While she was thinking that, Adrian continued. I was desperate and helpless, as was everyone on the ship. Everyone prayed to the god they believed in. Whether it was the Evernight goddess or Lord of Storms, we all prayed. I was born and raised in Fasak, so I prayed to the god of combat for a miracle, to save me from this nightmare, he said sadly, his eyes moist. He looked up at the stunned Sasha, Hazel, and Charlotte and gave a shaky smile. No miracle or salvation came. I was still trapped there, chained and sitting next to a pile of human flesh that was already giving off a stinking odor. He lowered his head again and continued, his voice seemed like it would break at any moment. Hazel, seeing her teacher like that, didn't hesitate anymore and grabbed her chair, she sat down next to him. Sasha didn't stop her, she was looking at Adrian unsure of what to do. Hazel had no experience in comforting someone so she did the best thing she come up with. She grabbed the hand of the man and clenched it slightly. This was how her mother comforted her when she was little, so she hoped this would make Adrian feel better. Adrian smiled gratefully at his student and recovering, he continued. I have never been a very faithful believer in the god of combat, I hardly went to church and when I did, it was only because I was forced by the sister from the orphanage who took care of me. This meant that I had no problem committing polytheism. I prayed to all 7 gods. Being from Fasak, the second god I prayed to was the Earth Mother. When that failed I prayed to the eternal blazing sun, then the god of steam and machinery. Without receiving any sign my despair only grew and I prayed to the remaining gods that since I was born I have been told that I have to hate. I prayed to the Evernight goddess, to the Lord of Storms, and finally to the god of knowledge and wisdom. None answered. Adrian's voice broke at this moment and he began to cry a little. He lowered his head and tried to cover his tears in shame. Sorry, you shouldn't see me like this. I'm supposed to be the example, the redhead said embarrassed as he kept failing to cover his tears that had grown thicker. Sasha bit her lip and unable to take it anymore, against everything she was taught, she got up from her seat and quickly stood next to Adrian and rubbed his back, trying to comfort him as Hazel was trying to do. Calm down, boss. Calm down teacher. We're here. Now I'm seriously a son of a bitch. Manipulating my team like this. Don't worry Sasha, Hazel. I'll make sure you girls grow up big and strong. Ads by PubFuture. Being comforted this way only made Adrian feel more horrible for what he was doing, but no matter how he felt he didn't plan on stopping. Sob thank you. Thank you. Adrian repeated shamelessly, trying to recover but failing each time. Charlotte looked uncomfortably at what was happening in front of him, unsure what he should do. Whether he should go with them and comfort Adrian or sit and wait for the redhead to recover. There is no trust on both sides, so it would be better to sit and watch, the purple-eyed man thought. He looked at how his boss was being comforted and couldn't help but be surprised. I can tell they care about each other. Although it seemed that Sasha was uncomfortable with the boss a while ago, she didn't hesitate to go and comfort him when he needed it. His view of the team he joined changed slightly and he saw them in a new light. After what Adrian considered long enough, he stopped crying and looked at Sasha and Hazel with a grateful smile and bloodshot eyes. Thanks. I needed it. Don't worry boss. We are here for you. Sasha said while nodding. Sasha is right teacher. We are here if you need anything. Hazel said seriously. Seriously, what a good team I have. The redhead thought happily on the inside, but on the outside he just nodded weakly. Thank you very much, but I'm better now. Okay boss, but I'll sit here now. Sasha nodded and brought her chair over to Adrian's side. Adrian didn't say anything about this, he just continued with his story. I didn't know what to do when my prayers failed. I turned to see the rest hoping that they had better luck, but they were just as desperate as me, repeating their prayers over and over again, or some were in shock, completely frozen like statues. At that moment I knew. That we were alone and that no one would come to save us. This made the despair that surrounded me start to choke me and I felt like my sanity was slipping away, the redhead said heavily. Not wanting to die, I did what the church so often says not to do. I prayed to a great existence to save me. Nobody said anything, everyone was attentive to Adrian's story. I didn't use any specific name or prayer, I just prayed with all my heart for a miracle. I wasn't expecting anything, it was just someone's helpless attempt to survive. But to my shock, my lord responded. The shadow surrounding Adrian disappeared at the mention of his lord and he even smiled genuinely. The powerful yet soft voice of my lord rang in my ears. He told me who he was. His name is the Scarlet Monarch. He is the fire that burns depravity. He is the calamity of the old days. He is closest to the oldest one. The trio hearing this couldn't help but be stunned. Although they all had different backgrounds, they all had a basic education in religion and knew what the man had said meant. A name of 3 lines. Only gods can use the names of 3 lines. The trio looked at the redhead as if he now had a new set of legs and arms along with 3 heads. They all came to the same conclusion. He received the answer from a god. Not giving the trio time to recover, Adrian continued. He is a god of a forgotten time, of a time lost in the mists of history. He fell into a deep sleep and stayed that way for a long, long time. He only recently woke up. Adrian said seriously. He would give me the strength to escape my despair and in exchange for that I would have to become his believer. That was the easiest decision I ever made in my life, he said, and silence filled the training ground. Wow, Sasha muttered under her breath and Hazel nodded at her partner's words. Looking around him and seeing that his story had the expected impact, Adrian felt proud of himself. This is a story I've been planning for quite some time. Originally it was shorter, but when Flora appeared I had no choice but to lengthen it. Any hole in the story she would have detected instantly. Adrian had just told Flora this story a few days ago and thanks to her reaction he knew that Sasha and the rest would buy it. Boss, I have a question. Charlotte's young but old voice broke the silence. Turning to see the purple-eyed man, Adrian smiled. Sure Charlotte, I'll try to solve your doubts the best I can, the redhead said with a soft nod. Charlotte's expression was serious. What happened to the rest of the people who were with you? Were they also saved or did something else happen? Sasha and Hazel's expressions broke into realization. Right, the boss never said what happened to the people who were with him. How did I not notice before? I was so excited that I ignored such an important detail. Sasha thought heavily but didn't move from her spot. She just looked at her leader waiting for an explanation. Why wouldn't teacher mention something so important? He's not one to leave those details out. Is there something he doesn't want to say? Hazel thought, feeling hurt as she looked at her teacher waiting for an explanation as well. Adrian's expression remained the same, there was no change. His smile remained the same, with the corners of his lips slightly raised. His relaxed brow and calm gaze. Nothing changed. Attentive Charlotte, very attentive, the redhead thought, quite satisfied with Charlotte. It's obvious that he is so observant. That is a necessity to be able to live in the East Borough. Nodding, Adrian responded. It was about to come to that. At such an answer Charlotte frowned slightly, but he didn't have time to protest because Adrian continued. My lord did not give me strength in the sense of the word, he did not give me power but courage. He told me that I already had the necessary strength to escape and that I just lacked the courage to do it. At that, Adrian chuckled. This infuriated me and I claimed that courage was not what I needed. Don't you think that's crazy? Claiming a god? Sasha, Hazel, and Charlotte's expressions were stupefied. This guy claimed a god and was still alive. Charlotte put his hand to his forehead and scratched it to try to ease his brain, which was working overtime. Is my sense failing me? Nothing he said is a lie, but if everything he said is true, how the fuck is he still alive? Seeing what Charlotte was doing, made the corners of Adrian's lips rise slightly. This was the gaslighting of a pyromaniac. Only a spectator would notice the lies that dance in every syllable, word, and sentence that comes out of Adrian's mouth. A little 9 sequence like Charlotte would never notice this. But Adrian did not prepare such simple and complex lies just to fool a sequence 9. Ads by PubFuture. No, he had prepared them to fool a demigod. And one of a pathway known for its tricks and master lies. Adrian's story had many parts of truth and a few small parts of lies. In those small parts, he had made sure that there was nothing strange that might arouse Flora's attention. Looking at the trio's faces, Adrian chuckled again. Every time I think about that moment, I prayed to my Lord and asked why he didn't send me a bolt of divine lightning to punish me for such blasphemy. Do you know what he told me? Not waiting for an answer, the redhead continued. Quote, I thought about his words for a long time, and after meditating on them I also found them funny, since I couldn't help but imagine a story. I imagined that an ant asked me for some sugar, but instead of giving her some, I told her where it was and she just had to go get it. This annoyed the ant who insulted me for that. I laughed a lot that day. The mere fact that an ant insulted me, someone whose size was not even comparable to her and could kill her in so many different ways that the puny little ant brain would never be able to comprehend, was ridiculous. At that moment I realized what my Lord was referring to. I was that ant to him. Adrian said with a smile. He shook his head slightly and continued. I'm getting off topic. My Lord said that while he could give me the power to split a mountain in half if I wanted, what had I done to deserve it? I was nothing at the time and he had no reason to help me. He then told me something that marked me for the rest of my life. Quote. These words shocked the trio, especially to Sasha and Charlotte, who felt identified with those words. Adrian continued. Our conversation didn't last long. The only thing he told me is that there was a werewolf on the ship, his powers and abilities, and that I would have to fight him if I wanted to escape, that if I managed to escape the ship, he would make sure I got to land. After that, I started my escape with this new courage given by my Lord. The first thing I did was, despite my disgust, take a bone from the pile of human flesh and use it to break my chains, but when I freed myself I didn't escape yet. There were an unknown number of guards outside the room and I couldn't take them all alone. I needed someone else, a partner. I talked to the rest of the people trapped there and told them that if they were willing to help me escape, I would free them. Of all the people there, only 2 accepted, a woman and a girl. Alice and Sarah respectively. The words from before and what Adrian said answered Charlotte's question. Isn't that a bit unfair? Sasha thought heavily but did not express her dissatisfaction with this, as she understood why her boss did it. The words from before echoed again and she considered how those people could have become a burden during the escape. The boss did the right thing. All 3 of them though. I already knew what the escape plan was. Getting to the deck was suicide, we would never make it. Fighting the guards much less. So, I came to the best plan, blowing the ship to pieces. Adrian said with a dangerous smile that surprised the trio. The ship we were on was a pirate ship and where they took us was the lowest part of it. When they transported us they didn't cover our faces so I could see all the way. Thanks to that I was able to see which floor the cannons were, and according to that the plan was born. Get to the gunpowder store on the 3rd floor and blow up the ship. We were already at sea for a long time and very far from Byam, so our only hope was to swim to one of the islands. Adrian told how they carefully climbed floor by floor, killing 2 guards and making it to the 3rd floor. Just when we finished spreading the gunpowder on the floor, werewolf James appeared, with the broken body of one of his men and a crazy look. He told us that he had killed all his men and that after us he would go for the ones that were downstairs. I didn't know it at the time, but the guy was losing control, he said seriously, and the trio nodded, totally focused on the story. I don't know why, but James focused on me from the first moment. Because he was losing control, his movements became tense and clumsy, which allowed me to dodge. Alice and Sarah took advantage of the fact that James was focused on me to escape to the next floor. Sasha and Hazel frowned at this. Ads by PubFuture. What bad companions. Hazel commented and Sasha nodded. We will never do that to you, boss. We will always be by your side, no matter what. The giant said seriously, and Adrian looked at the woman in genuine surprise. Sasha's green eyes sparkled with bravery and Hazel's brown eyes sparkled with truth. Adrian chuckled at this. I seriously underestimated them, the redhead thought with a warmth growing in his chest. I don't regret trusting you, the redhead thought with a sweet smile, a real one this time. Ever since what happened with Robert at the party, he had been closed off and didn't trust people anymore. Now it could be said that he did not trust any stranger and even considered them a threat. That didn't change, and Adrian doubts it will. The only ones that you could say he trusts are Sasha, Nathan, Detective Isengar Stanton, Zio, Marich and Sharon, Klein, Audrey, and Alger. Maybe a little Furs. And only recently has he started to trust more people, with only Hazel and Flora being the new additions. There was still a bit of mistrust with Flora because of who she was, but maybe with time that will change. Shaking his head, Adrian looked at Sasha and Hazel. I'm sure of that, but please don't blame them. I asked them to run away, Besides, that was the last time I saw them alive, he said calmly. Quote. Upon hearing about the possible fate of the women who abandoned their boss teacher, Sasha and Hazel fell silent. Shaking his head, Adrian continued. After that, I managed to shoot him a few times, once in the head but nothing, the only thing I managed was to make him lose control completely. I wish I could show you. The guy turned into a huge malnourished, bald, malformed, ugly dog. He was horrible. The redhead joked and the trio looked at him flat. Ignoring the look, Adrian continued. After James lost control I knew I was almost totally doomed. I had nothing to harm him and now that he was completely gone he would be much faster and deadlier. I had nothing to do. With no other option, I did what I still consider to be the best option. I grabbed one of the lamps from there and threw it into the gunpowder we had thrown earlier. I barely managed to launch myself down the stairs to the floor below when everything exploded. To be honest, I don't remember much, just a loud ringing in my ears, my body hitting something many times and swallowing a lot of salted water. I don't know how I didn't drown. Saying the last thing, Adrian laughed. That's a lie. I know why I didn't drown. It was because my lord protected me from the explosion, the sinking of the ship and the 3 hours it took me to swim to the nearest island. Since that day I have been a faithful believer in my lord and I will follow him until the day of battle. Adrian finished his story by closing his eyes and with a small smile. His chest felt lighter after talking about what happened. This was the second time he had told someone about it, and even though there were lies there and a lot of information was missing, this was liberating for him. Talking about your problems from time to time is not bad. The redhead reminisced a bit. Charlotte, who had listened to all of Adrian's story, was surprised and a little incredulous. Everything he told me sounds like an epic story from a fairy tale. From being kidnapped by pirates, being taken on a ship, and escaping by blowing that damn ship to pieces. Sighing, Charlotte looked up and purple collided with red. I have one last question, boss. Won't that be a problem? Adrian smirked mischievously and raised an eyebrow. Is that the question? Charlotte's eye twitched, but controlling himself he released a breath and shook his head. My question is, what does the Scarlet Monarch seek? What does he seek to achieve? Adrian smiled mysteriously and looked up at the ceiling. It is quite simple. My lord seeks to spread his belief and prepare his believers for the apocalypse. The temperature in the room immediately dropped and the air became thick, making it difficult to breathe. It was as if they had entered a place they had no right to be. Using the sleeve of his shirt to wipe the sweat from his forehead, Charlotte could feel his heart beating like a locomotive. Why, I'm feeling like I heard something I shouldn't have, he thought heavily while feeling his back wet with cold sweat. Teacher, what are you trying to say with that? Hazel asked awkwardly and confused. Boss, what are you talking about? Apocalypse. That's a heavy thing to say. Sasha said, stuttering. The sadness that filled Adrian's eyes had disappeared a while ago, now he only showed seriousness and calm. Any trace of the previous episode only remained in the form of a trail of tears on his cheeks. Do you know the myth? He ignored his teammate's question and asked one of his own. The trio frowned in doubt and looked with even more confusion at the redhead. Who doesn't know the myth, boss? Hazel pointed. So you know about the apocalypses that each church tells in its own way. Adrian said calmly and everyone could feel their skin crawl. Adrian smiled mysteriously. He turned his head and focused his attention on Charlotte. Unconsciously, the younger man straightened his back. I told you earlier that the team was looking to get stronger and survive. Do you remember what you asked me? Adrian said nonchalantly. Charlotte was silent for a few seconds, he nodded tensely. I asked you. The redhead nodded in agreement with the answer. He then looked at each of the members of his team, from the oldest to the youngest member. His smile faded and his face turned serious. I will tell you a truth of this world. Although most church Bibles are full of hoaxes to praise their gods and attract new believers, there is still truth in them. Charlotte, already sensing what was coming, grabbed the corners of his chair for support. Hazel and Sasha did the same in their way. One bit her cheek and the other clenched her fists tightly while her shoulders trembled. Then Adrian blew the trumpet. The most important truth is that the apocalypse is real and it is not far away. His pupils narrowed and his breathing slowed. A slight ringing in his ears. Charlotte could feel a headache coming on, and just because he grabbed the chair earlier he didn't fall to the floor from the shock. Sasha and Hazel also had their reactions to this horrible revelation. Hee. Sasha laughed in disbelief as the force with which she clenched her fists increased until her nails dug into her flesh and hot red liquid dripped from her hands. Hazel shot up from her chair, her expression filled with horror. That's ridiculous, teacher. Apocalypse. That's impossible. Everything looks fine outside. She screamed as she shook her head, refusing to believe what Adrian had said. Adrian looked at his student, his eyes softening. Hazel, just because the outside is fine it doesn't mean the inside is. Saying that, Adrian calmly got up from his chair and walked over to Hazel, who didn't back down. The redhead placed his hands on his student's shoulders and made her look into his eyes. The wheels are already turning, and if we want to have a chance to survive and protect our loved ones, we have to get stronger. This is ridiculous, she mumbled, a shaky smile on her face. Then her expression broke into fury and she turned away from her teacher. She could forgive him for keeping his real name from her, and even for him believing in an evil god. But all this about an apocalypse? Ridiculous. Pulling away from her teacher, Hazel exploded. I refuse to believe it. If this apocalypse thing is real, then prove it. It's not that simple, Hazel. If I told you any more information I would only put you in danger. Adrian said calmly, his eyes still soft. This only made Hazel angrier. Then show me that your god is real and I'll believe anything. Show me that your god isn't your invention and really exists. As soon as those words left her mouth, the realization hit Hazel, who looked terrified at her boss. Teacher, I didn't mean. Her words died and her skin prickled and she recoiled in terror. A chill also covered Charlotte, who stood up in shock and stepped back and prepared to throw his multiple charms. Sasha also got up and with great speed moved in front of Hazel and raised her hand to Adrian. Calm down, boss. Hazel didn't mean it. The giant tried to de-escalate the situation and show her bravery, but that failed due to how she was trembling. The softness disappeared completely, being replaced by a coldness only comparable to the coldest of glaciers. Adrian's scarlet eyes now looked like lava about to burst. Never. His tongue trailed off in barely contained fury and they all took a step back. Don't ever say that again. Small flames flickered around his, showing her fury that he barely managed to contain it. Hazel looked at her teacher with absolute terror. This was the first time she had seen this facet of her teacher. She had never seen him angry. Hazel. Sasha's voice woke her from her terror and Hazel looked at her teammate. A nervous smile was on Sasha's face. Ads by PubFuture. It would be a good idea to apologize. Apologize, she muttered, the word feeling strange on her tongue. Yes, apologize. Sasha shot her a hard look that made Hazel tense. The noblewoman nodded vigorously and looked at her teacher fearfully. She took 2 slow steps and stood next to Sasha. She gave a deep curtsy to the point that her body was in a 7 shape. Please forgive me, Teacher Adrian. I didn't mean to insult your god in such a rude way. I beg you to forgive me. Quote. 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 An awkward silence completely covered the entire room. What kind of fucking apology is that? Charlotte thought, dumbfounded as he looked at Hazel. He had seen drunken husbands apologize better. Even a psycho apologizes better. Hazel, baby, don't tell me this is your first time apologizing. Adrian thought internally as he looked at Hazel. He knew that Hazel's parents had coddled her a lot, but he didn't expect that it was to the point that the young woman didn't even know how to apologize properly. Maybe I should pay them a visit on how to raise their daughter. After a long and tense silence, the redhead sighed and the flames that were flickering around him stopped. You need to improve how you apologize. Besides, it's not me you have to apologize to. While saying that, Adrian started taking out red candles from his jacket. Hazel bit her cheek uncomfortably as she looked to Sasha for help. But the giantess shook her head and returned her attention to what Adrian was doing. Traitor. Hazel thought hurt, but she too focused her attention on what Adrian was doing. Charlotte, feeling that the atmosphere had relaxed quite a bit, lowered her hand and hid his charms again. He saw how Adrian was placing the red bells in specific places and was confused. What are you doing, boss? I feel like I should know, but I don't understand. The purple-eyed sighed, internally disappointed. His knowledge of mysticism was extremely poor and the only thing he knew on the subject was the knowledge brought by the potion. But this ignorance and the strangeness of what Adrian was doing piqued Charlotte's curiosity. Unable to contain it and trying to forget the previous episode, he decided to express his doubt. Boss, what are you doing? Adrian, finishing lighting the candles, turned to look at the young man and then looked at Hazel, who tensed. You asked me to prove to you that my lord exists and I will do that. Everyone present tensed and looked uncomfortably at the man. No one was more tense than Sasha, who had to restrain herself from jumping and stopping her boss. Controlling her actions, Sasha spoke tensely. And how do you plan to do it, boss? Simple. I will make an altar to him, and pray for an answer, there you will see the greatness of my lord. Adrian said confidently as he pulled some red poppies out of his jacket. Sasha nodded slightly at this, and after thinking for a few moments she decided to watch. An altar. Is that an altar? Charlotte thought, dumbfounded as he watched Adrian finish arranging the red candles and flowers. This is the first time he had seen something like this. At his lack of knowledge, Charlotte could only lament. Finishing putting everything in place, Adrian took the symbol from another pocket and put it in place. He formed a small ball of fire that quickly lit the candles. He knelt down, but before praying he turned to look at his team. If you are uncomfortable or afraid, you can stand at the exit door if you want and watch everything from a safe distance. Sasha only thought about it for 3 seconds and accepted this offer. She took Hazel with her and they were followed by Charlotte. Now the trio watched from the exit what Adrian was going to do. The redhead was not offended that his team took that option, but rather he was very happy. Being careful is the most important thing. Flora commented and Adrian nodded in agreement. Putting those things aside, Adrian lowered his head and clasped his hands. He closed his eyes and began to pray aloud so his team would be able to hear what he was saying. The scarlet monarch that burns depravity. You are the calamity of the old days. You are the closest to the oldest one. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. Your devoted servant prays for a sign of your magnificence. Adrian didn't even wait for the whispers as he already started drawing the sphere of light in his mind. For an altar to a god, it's quite rare that there isn't any type of oil. Sasha thought, confused as she looked at her boss's back. She didn't waste much time on the subject. Rituals and altars were never her specialty, so she wouldn't think about it anymore. As soon as something looks weird, I will get them out of here. Sasha thought seriously as she moved to Hazel's side and prepared to shoulder carry her out of the room. Ads by PubFuture. Hazel, for her part, ignorant of her teammates' thoughts, focused her attention on her boss and looked at him worriedly. Charlotte, for his part, kept his distance from the duo and focused part of his attention on Adrian. If what he said is real and his lord responds, I'll ask if he can help me make charms. I use my spirituality to make them. It's very slow and therefore there is a risk that the creation of the charm will fail, but if a god helps. He was already thinking about the many ideas that he could finally try, being that he would no longer have to rely so much on his spirituality. While everyone was thinking about what to do, something incredible happened. Around the kneeling Adrian, the fire from the candles began to pulsate and change colors. Red, pink, purple, fuchsia, and burgundy. Suddenly the fire from all the candles rose several meters and came together at the same point, in front of Adrian. These threads of fire were woven together until they formed a door of orange flames that began to expel yellowish smoke. Slowly a magnificent city began to form in the distance. This city, covered in yellowish smoke, was patrolled by humanoid beings of fire that were wearing red rusty armor. At the moment of being observed, they stopped and turned to see them. They made a military salute to the sky. Above the city, sitting in the yellow clouds, there was a mysterious figure covered in yellowish smoke. This figure appeared male and was covered by a dark red papal robe that created a shadow that covered his face, leaving only his chin and mouth to be seen. The figure was wearing an armor of black and bloody rusty metal. Despite not being able to see the face, everyone could feel the enormous weight of his gaze. Instinctively, Sasha and Hazel knelt with their foreheads kissing the ground, not daring to raise their heads. The two of them were trembling in terror and did not dare to even breathe. Everyone was kneeling, everyone except Charlotte, who stared at the door in a daze. A whirlpool began to form deep within his purple eyes that were focused on the door. Before his vision changed and without him noticing, the yellowish smoke that came out of the door had moved up to him and like a snake, it crawled up his body until it focused on his eyes. Before he could react, the smoke cleared, but now he was wearing circular glasses. At that moment, Charlotte regained control of himself and looked in shock at the figure sitting on the clouds. On the uncovered part of the figure's face was an amused smile. This figure raised a finger and waved it from side to side as if reproaching a naughty child. Charlotte fell to his knees and tears began to fall from his eyes. The figure lowered his hand and let it rest on the cloud he was sitting on. He turned his attention to the kneeling Adrian and looked at him for a few moments. Slowly the image shown by the door of flames disappeared, the yellowish smoke that covered the room vanished as well as the glasses that Charlotte had. The room returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But despite that, no one dared to move. Sasha and Hazel were still kneeling and Charlotte had his gaze lost where the door had been before. After about 15 seconds, which seemed like forever, Adrian got up from his position. The redhead wiped the dust from his knees and began to collect his materials calmly and without any rush. At no time did the trio move. Only when Adrian finished cleaning up he walked up to the trio and looked at them with a raised eyebrow. Now do you believe in the existence of my lord? Hazel shakily raised her head and looked at her teacher with eyes filled with fear and tears. Forgive me, she said in a voice so weak it was barely above a whisper. At the state of his student, Adrian's gaze showed a bit of regret. I definitely overdid it. He knelt in front of her and with his thumbs wiped the tears from his student's face. Everything is forgiven, Hazel, everything is fine now. It's over. His voice was soft and comforting as he used his thumbs to wipe away the tears that kept falling from Hazel's eyes. Forgive me, teacher, Hazel said with a tearful moan, louder this time. It's fine, Adrian repeated with the same soft smile. This only made Hazel cry harder. Even though she had questioned the existence of his god and had offended him, he forgave her so easily. Who does that? While crying, Hazel just moved to her teacher and burying her head on his chest, she cried as she hugged him. Forgive me, teacher. I won't do it again. She screamed through tears and Adrian felt even more horrible about himself. I am the worst. He thought heavily as he returned the hug and let Hazel cry while at the same time, he tried to comfort her as best he could. Flora observed this with a serene gaze. What Hazel had gone through would undoubtedly be the biggest scare of her life, but she should be grateful. What you did was insult a god, brat. It was only the mercy of that god that you were not punished for that blasphemy, she thought as she watched the tearful Hazel continue to hug Adrian. Flora didn't care that the brat was touching what was hers, she was just a brat. Besides, at least she deserved some comfort. Sasha slowly stood up shakily as well, her eyes vacant as she looked around her. I didn't even have time to do anything. Sasha then noticed the frozen Charlotte who kept staring at an empty spot. Boss, she said a bit stunned, but when she looked at what was happening she decided to remain silent. Adrian didn't stay much longer at the training camp. After consoling his student until she calmed down, he only exchanged a few words with Sasha and after making Charlotte react and explaining the training days, he returned to his room. Coming out of the shadows, the first thing he did was throw his jacket onto the chair, leaving only his shirt on. He unbuttoned his shirt but didn't take it off. Don't you think you were a bit harsh with them? Especially with the brat? Flora asked with a bit of curiosity. Adrian rolled his shoulders as he lay on his bed and used his forearm as a pillow. To introduce a god to a normal person one has to be calm, friendly, and patient. You explain to them what your religion is about, what it seeks, and you have to avoid overcomplicating it so as not to scare the person. But introducing a god to the Beyonders is a different case, they are more likely to attack you than listen to you. The way the Beyonders view the gods is different from normal people and this is due to knowledge. While a normal person knows that a god outside of the seven orthodox is bad, they don't give it that much importance. The Beyonders on the other hand, they know how dangerous they are. Adrian calmly explained as he formed several small balls of fire that began to spin in his right palm. Flora listened to all this without interrupting the redhead. In my opinion, the best way to introduce a god to a Beyonder is to do it with a bam, the redhead said at the same time that one of the fireballs exploded. It could be said that this was shock therapy. Similar to how he had forced Flora to say his honorific name, he had now introduced his god persona to his team. Listening to the explanation, Flora fell silent for a few seconds. The way your lord spreads his belief is curious. Adrian smiled at the demigod's words. My lord is different, the way I spread, his faith will be special. Special would not be the word I would use. Flora commented internally. Wanting to change the subject, she spoke again. Are you going to read your friend's letter or what? I was just about to. Adrian responded nonchalantly as the fireballs disappeared and he reached into his pocket. When he took it out he had an envelope in his hand, this envelope was lime green in color and was sealed with a dark green seal. Flexing his forearm and using the hidden blade to open it, he took out the letter. Relaxing his forearm and letting the blade tuck into his wrist, he began to read the letter. I just wanted to write to ask how you've been, if you have been well or if you are having problems. If you are having problems you can always talk to me, you know. Every day I'm in church or otherwise, I'm in the South Market buying things with Sasha. Speaking of Sasha, she is amazing. She is not only beautiful but also very strong. When I can't lift something even using all my strength she only has to use one arm and picks it up like nothing. I wish I was that strong. There is not much to say about Father Utraski, he has been treating me very well and I appreciate that. Unfortunately, the church is almost always empty, only a few people come in the morning, but nothing else. There is only one person that comes every day, it is a woman called Bee, yes, like the insect, and she has a very cute daughter called Mantis. Apparently, her family has the habit of naming people with names of insects. Anyway, as always, I will wait for a new letter from you and again. Ads by PubFuture. Thanks for everything. From your friend, Opera Greater Than. You can tell that she appreciates you a lot. Oh, dear friend, Flora said in a teasing tone, but if you paid attention you would notice the annoyance in her voice. Don't joke with that, Flora. Adrian said, shaking his head as he got up. The day he took Opera to Harvest Church he had acted quite childish during the trip, and that was hangover time's fault. The clock had distorted his maturity, resulting in that childishness. And because of that he agreed to send and receive letters. Sighing lightly, Adrian ran a hand through his red hair. Well, at least I have other things to do during the day other than beating up gang members and robbing them. Replacing the letter in the envelope and with a small flame on the tip of his finger, Adrian reheated the seal. He then took a big leap and reached the ceiling. He placed the letter next to several others. Falling to the ground without a sound, Adrian didn't return to his bed but pulled a small silver knife from his belt. He let his spirituality flow into the knife and it came out of the tip of it. He began to move from corner to corner of the room. I said I wouldn't bother him again at this time, but hey, what am I going to do? Several days have passed and I have to tell him about the progress of my research. Adrian thought as he finished making the wall of spirituality, but at that moment an idea came to him. A mischievous smile grew on his face. I doubt Klein would mind someone suffering a bit from his pain, I think he'd even be glad. Kneeling, his smile disappeared and his face turned serious. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. ... Klein groaned in his bed as he opened one eye. He was back in a fetal position and hugging his pillow. Not again, he muttered unconsciously, but suddenly realized what was happening. He jumped up and looked out his window. A beautiful crimson moon hung in the black curtain that was the sky. At the same time that happened, murmurs reached his ears and he cursed internally. He grabbed his pocket watch from his nightstand and clacked it open. 1:48 a.m. You guys aren't sleeping or what? Klein muttered, annoyed. He got up from his bed and closing the curtains, he made sure his door was locked. Confirmed that, he wasted no time and took the 4 steps. With each step he said the incantation. The murmurs were from a man and there was only one person who would pray to him at this time. Chariot got more information, Klein thought, trembling slightly, eager to find out what the strongest member of the Tarot Club had discovered. By taking the last step and reciting the last incantation, he entered a state of cogitation. At the same time the ravings came. Hornassus. Phlegara. Hornassus. Phlegara. His potion wasn't far from fully digested, so it wasn't very hard for him to endure these ravings. He felt himself ascending at the same time that the ravings decreased. Ads by PubFuture. But just before ascending, one last raving reached his ears. It was so distant that Klein couldn't understand what it was saying. Circa. A.N.M.R. ... Klein appeared in his seat of honor in the Great Hall of Giants above the gray fog. Looking to his side, he saw the pulsing crimson flame with black spots. Klein extended his hand towards it and let his spirituality flow. While doing so he couldn't help but find it curious. Why is the connection to Chariot so different from the rest? All the others are represented as crimson stars, so why is his a flame with black spots? Maybe it's because he's a demigod, but I feel like that's not the case, Klein thought seriously. Then the scene of the kneeling Chariot slowly appeared. Klein lowered his head and didn't look at Chariot, just listened. Mr. Fool, I have found something that may be useful. I've been investigating the Aurora Order, and after tracking them these last few days I managed to find out something about the ritual. It turns out that the vessel they wanted to use for the ritual was very weak, so weak that it wouldn't hold the result they were looking for. To fix that they used the remains of a direct descendant of a high-sequence Beyander from the death pathway. I'm not sure the exact sequence of the descendant's father, but the minimum is sequence 3, Ferryman. Klein's skin trembled in a cold sweat. The remains of the descendant of a demigod. What kind of ritual is the Aurora Order looking to complete? Klein thought shakily, but then he realized a problem. Use the remains of a descendant for the ritual. Do remains count as mystical materials? Well, they are the remains of a demigod's son, so their remains have to be special. Also, Ferryman. This is the first high sequence name I learn. Klein thought a little happy, but that happiness did not last long. But what do I do with this information? I have no idea where they got the remains from, and the information is too little to guess the place. This information is of no use to me. Klein thought, annoyed. But before he could think further, Chariot's voice spoke, pulling him out of his head. Also, Mr. Fool, if possible, I would like to have a private meeting with Mr. Hanged Man regarding our deal. Private meeting? Klein began to tap the edge of the table with his finger as he thought about the man's request. There is almost no problem with Chariot's request, the only problems is the hour, and I have no idea if the Hanged Man is awake right now. After thinking about it for a moment, Klein sighed and stretched out his hand towards the Chariot's crimson flame. Good job, Chariot. Regarding your request, I'll pass it on to Hanged Man, if he accepts it's in his hands. He spoke with a calm voice and sent the message. With that done, Klein waited a few moments and Chariot's flame pulsed again. No problem, Mr. Fool. I got a high sequence name for free, this is the least I can do for Chariot. Klein just nodded at Chariot's words. He held out his hand to the crimson star that represented the Hanged Man, ready to send the request. But just as he was sending Chariot's request to Hanged Man, he stopped. A cold sweat fell down his back. I almost sent the actual image of Chariot's body to the Hanged Man. In other words, he almost killed the Hanged Man. With what face would he have had to face justice and Chariot? My mask as a great existence would fall apart and I would become the clumsy, stupid great existence that killed a member by accident. Klein thought, alarmed as well as relieved that he saved it in time. Sighing, Klein didn't bother to create an image of Chariot, all he did was cover his entire body in gray mist, revealing nothing but the room he was in. With that done, he sent the edited video to the Hanged Man, some part of the Sonia Sea. In a 3-masted sailboat. In a room on this ship, there was a sleeping man. This man was in his 30s and has dark blue hair and tanned skin. He is wearing a white shirt and brown pants. This man is Alger Wilson. Alger Wilson was lying on his bed, covered by a navy blue blanket. His breathing is calm, his chest was going down and up. He was fast asleep, dreaming of waves and salty winds. A small smile on his face due to his good dream. But then, his relaxed expression turned seriously sour, as if he had eaten a juicy, salt-coated, peeled lemon. The man's dream had changed, it was no longer about beautiful dark blue waves and salty winds with the smell of the ocean but about an old room with a man covered in gray mist. Mr. Fool, if possible I would like to have a private meeting with Mr. Hanged Man regarding our deal. His vision was blurry but he could still feel conscious. For a moment Alger was alarmed and he thought he was being attacked, but after a few seconds of alarm and that nothing happened to him, he calmed down. He looked around with a cold mind. Is this a dream? Alger thought seriously as he tried to move. Then the image of his dream changed, it was no longer the old room or the misty man but now it was a mysterious place full of gray fog. A voice reached his ears, calm and loaded with knowledge. Alger lowered his head unconsciously. What is your decision, Mr. Hanged Man? My decision? Alger repeated mentally, momentarily confused but quickly recovered. Is it because of what I saw a few moments ago? But who was? Realization flashed in his eyes and annoyance flashed by. Chariot. Releasing a light sigh, Alger calmed down his anger and began to think with a cold mind. Why would Chariot request a private meeting just 2 days before the auction? Did something happen and he has to cancel our deal? Alger rejected that idea. Chariot didn't strike him as a man who called things off at the last minute. So it has to be something else. Sighing again, Alger nodded. I accept the private meeting, Mr. Fool. The voice didn't respond again, he only saw a crimson flash that quickly enveloped him, and when he stepped back, he found himself back in his seat. Good evening, Mr. Hanged Man. Excuse me for the time to contact you, but I didn't have much choice. An amused voice sounded next to him. Alger couldn't help it and a blue eyebrow trembled, he turned his head, and there as always is Chariot, looking at him. Alger said nothing, he just ignored the man and looked up at the seat of honor at the top. The fool was sitting there, watching everything with his cheek resting on his left palm, and as always he was covered in gray mist. Alger nodded respectfully towards the great existence. Good night, Mr. Fool. Klein smiled slightly and nodded gently. Good night, Mr. Hanged Man. You don't need to pay attention to me, just finish your business so we can all rest. Ads by PubFuture. Especially me, I already want to go back to my warm bed. Klein added mentally, already able to imagine the panda eyes he would have in the morning. Why did I have to accept Chariot's request? If I had refused, I would be sleeping by now. His body tensed slightly as something hit him. Why didn't I tell him to do it in the morning? Am I that stupid? Klein was heartbroken. To calm down he tried to console himself. No, that would be ridiculous, it would damage my image as a great existence. What great existence would say that we do it in the morning because he is tired and wants to sleep? Accepting was the most logical and precise decision. While Klein was lampooning in his little world, Alger just looked at the fool gratefully. Despite being a great existence superior to humans, he cares for us and wishes that we finish so we can rest. The fool is a friendly and fair existence. Alger's image of the fool brightened considerably. But despite that, he quickly looked away from the fool because looking at him for a long time could offend him. Just because he was friendly, it didn't mean he would tolerate disrespect. Looking to his side, directly at Chariot, Alger frowned. What happened, Mr. Chariot? Do you want to cancel our deal? Adrian raised his hands and said, feigning surprise and confusion. Wow. Calm down, Mr. Hanged Man, it's not what you think, quite the contrary, I want to add one thing to our deal. Alger narrowed his eyes in suspicion. What is, Mr. Chariot? I'd like you to also look up Melee Scholar's potion formula, that's the name of sequence 8 of the mystery prior pathway. Adrian said with a smile and quickly added. Of course, I know you're not in the best place financially, so I'll give you the money to buy it, and your payment will be knowing the formula and being able to sell it. Adrian then chuckled before adding. Of course, you can't sell it here, the rest is free ground and I don't care. Same with the conspirator formula. At the mention of his economic status, Alger grunted annoyed, but after a few seconds, he just sighed. Alright, Mr. Chariot, I accept your request, but I hope you remember this in the future. Investment in the future, huh? Intelligent. Worthy of an old and experienced Beander. Klein thought while watching this movie. I wish I had popcorn with a Coke, it would be more entertaining. I wonder if I can summon that here. Will it have a flavor or just air? Klein started lampooning again. Adrian smiled and nodded. Of course, Mr. Hanged Man, I'll remember this. If you ever need something, just ask and I'll give it to you, even with a bow, to show my appreciation for you. Alger nodded somewhat tensely. Is that all, Mr. Chariot? At the question, Adrian sighed sadly. Do you want to get rid of me so fast? I thought we had something special, Mr. Hanged Man. I thought you were different from other men, but you're the same. Alger's brain froze. What the fuck? When did this become a romantic comedy? Klein thought in shock. If he'd had his popcorn and soda and he didn't have to pretend to be some grand existence, he would have jumped in surprise and his food and drink would have gone flying through the air because of this script twist. Facing the frozen Alger, Adrian laughed in amusement while shaking his head. Don't you have friends you joke with like this? That's sad, you know. But to answer your question, yes, that's all. Adrian turned to look at Klein. We're done, Mr. Fool. Hey, you, why do I feel like the one in charge of divorcing a couple? Klein thought as the corners of his lips twitched. He turned his head slightly and saw a tense Hanged Man. Being seen by the fool, Alger only gave a shaky nod, and this was enough for Klein to cut the connection with the Star and Flame. Ads by PubFuture. The figures of the Chariot and the Hanged Man vanished, leaving Klein alone in the Great Hall. Looking at where Chariot was sitting before him, Klein could only shake his head with a tight smile. You really have no shame. Sighing, Klein was about to leave the space above the gray fog but stopped at the last moment. Quote. After thinking about it for a few seconds, he controlled the gray fog around him. He quickly had a pot of popcorn in front of him along with a can of Coca-Cola. Here goes nothing, Klein mumbled to himself as he grabbed a handful of the popcorn. Touching the popcorn, he couldn't help but be surprised. I can feel the salt and the soft butter. With this realization, Klein popped that handful of popcorn into his mouth. Quote. A few small tears fell from his eyes. This is delicious, he whispered with his mouth full. He then swallowed and grabbed the Coca-Cola can. He opened it and quickly took a sip. Ha! Klein exclaimed happily, feeling how refreshing the drink was. Just how I remembered it. He said happily, but then an idea came to him. If I can create junk food, I should also be able. He did not hesitate and again controlled the gray fog. A new plate appeared in front of him. This dish had pork cut into small square pieces, which had been lightly fried and stir-fried in a sauce made from sugar, ketchup, white vinegar, and soy sauce, with chopped onion, carrot, and bell pepper. Klein inhaled and the smell of home reached his heart, warming his soul. Sweet and sour pork. Oh, I missed you so much. Klein exclaimed as he created some chopsticks and began to eat. So Klein spent his time creating various dishes from his hometown at the gray fog and ate as he had never done before. He only stopped when he ran out of spirituality and had to return to his body. Returning to his body, Klein sighed happily, almost being able to taste everything he ate on his tongue. He then touched his stomach and could only sigh with some sadness. What I eat in the gray fog doesn't transfer to real life, it's not even real. If it had been real and Klein had a full stomach, he would do everything he could to get the food out of the gray fog and give it to his siblings to eat. So we don't have to worry about spending on food anymore. Klein thought happily, but then his stomach growled. He was hungry. Spoiler alert. Read at your own risk. I'm joking, feel free to read it. What's up, guys? In a few days, you will be able to meet someone very, very, very special. Who do you think it is? A little clue. You all know this someone very well. And he has red hair. Well, this is it, guys. I have lost all motivation to continue this story, so this is the final chapter. I can say that it was a good trip. Reading each comment filled my heart with joy. There were bad and good moments, but I can say that the good overwhelmed the bad. Again, I can only say sorry. I don't think I possess the ability to finish this story. I can only hope that you enjoyed the journey and you will forgive me for this. Unfortunately, this is the end of the story of Adrian Kenway. He repeating the words of the god of deceit. Are you pleasantly surprised? Ads by PubFuture. Ha 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 ha. Ha. It's a lie. Everything I said is a lie. This story will be completed no matter what. I hope I didn't scare you with the little prank I played on you. It was tacky, but it's pretty late, so I wanted to give you guys something to think about before bed. What I want to get at is that I am very grateful to you. The past month we achieved something I thought impossible. We have reached over 1 million views. This is something I never imagined would happen, and it's all because of you. The support you give to this story motivates me to keep writing. I read all your comments and I almost shit myself from laughing at your memes, and I really appreciate the good wishes. It also helps me see things in other ways, so please feel free to leave one. I haven't forgotten about those who don't comment but always leave a power stone. Also, thank you very much. And also thanks you the _Shopik for recommending me to put this story in the fanfic part. Ads by PubFuture. Without that, not even by a miracle, this story would have all the recognition it has now. There was another person who told me the same, but I can't find their user. If you are reading this message is also for you. To all of you again. Thank you for everything. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope we can go to the end of Adrian's story together. With that said, now we can talk about the surprise. Originally, I planned that the surprise would be revealed when the story reached the 1 million views, but it was not possible. But better late than never, right? So, here is my gift to you for all the support you have given me during all these months. I present to you, the one and only, Adrian Kenway. Check this paragraph comment, and please just respond to my comment so future readers can find it very easily. This beautiful art was made by the very talented hands of Miss Leah, at bleeding_sun in Twitter. Thanks to her it was possible to bring to life our beautiful tomato princess. Feel free to check her Twitter to see more of her art. Again, congratulations to priest_Yuri because he was the one to guess correctly what the surprise was. To everyone reading this, present readers and future readers, if you can, please tell me what did you think the surprise was before it was revealed in chapter 164. Finally, if everything goes well, there may be another art by December of this year, but please don't get your hopes up. As only a small possibility. But you can be sure there will be more art for this book, but it will take a long time. Also, if you feel like it, you can also draw fan art and stuff. Just tell me so I can see it. Anyway, have a good night and I'll see you later. Love you. With care, the witness heart hum. La la la, la la, la la la. Inside a rather large bathroom, in a white ceramic bathtub full of hot water, a naked young man was singing. The man had a huge smile on his face was shining and it seemed that a huge weight was lifted from his shoulders. La la, la la la. His voice was quite good, and had a certain smoothness and softness that would attract quite a few women, single or not. La la, la la, la la. The man finished singing while letting out a sigh. He looked up at his beautiful ceiling, personally decorated by one of the best artists in the last 30 years, and sighed again with pleasure. Finally, I'm finally an apothecary, he thought in ecstasy as he looked down at his body. He ran his hand through his hair and before his eyes, an aura appeared all over his body. There was a decent amount of various colors, greens, reds, blues, oranges, yellows, etc. Although he did not understand very well the reason for the colors, thanks to the knowledge brought by the potion he knew what the colors were and represented. Each color is the health and state of my body, the lighter the healthier and the darker the worse, he thought, surprised with himself as he looked at his hand that glowed a brilliant lime green. His entire body glowed with health. The smile that was on his face grew with pride. He looked to his side and through the steam, he pictured a standing Adrian. This Adrian looked embarrassed and shy. Glaint's smile turned patronizing and he rested his head in the palm of his hand as he ran a hand through his hair again. See Adrian, I did it by myself without your help. Now I am a true Beander. He mentally exclaimed as he used his hand and splashed Adrian's illusion and it disappeared. At this, Glaint laughed proudly and arrogantly, he sank further into the water. You won't be able to bully me like you've been doing all this time. Now I can protect myself. With his new knowledge of making potions, he would now be able to defend himself and even exact revenge on Adrian. It looks like he takes great care of his hair. I wonder how his reaction would be if one day he wakes up bald. He thought evilly while laughing under the water generating bubbles. Knock knock. Before he could continue his evil thoughts, someone knocked on the bathroom door snapping him out of his fantasy. Glaint frowned and looked annoyed at the door. What? He exclaimed as he stood up until his torso was out of the water. His torso was not muscular but it was healthy, he had a very decent lady's hips and the coconut oil left his skin glowing. Master Glaint, we have to leave in an hour if you wish to be on time for lunch with Master Dutch. Alfred's calm voice sounded from behind the door. At the mention of his friend, Glaint's expression softened and he sighed. I'll be out in a few minutes, get my clothes ready Alfred. As you wish, Master Glaint. Alfred responded and left to fulfill the request of the noble Viscount. Alone again, Glaint could only sigh and sank back into the water. Wilson Mansion. Dining room. At a long table, seated facing each other, were Dutch and Glaint. In front of each them was a plate. On this plate there was a juicy piece of rib in wine, still with the bone, it was accompanied by creamed potatoes and a glass of fine wine. Thank you for accepting my invitation Glaint. I know it was sudden and you're busy but I appreciate you coming. Dutch said gratefully, a small smile on his face. Glaint returned the smile and shook his head. Ads by PubFuture. It's nothing my friend, these last days I haven't had much work so coming here wasn't a problem. Besides, you know I can't turn down your chef's prime rib. Dutch raised an eyebrow gracefully and snorted slightly. You're only here for the food. He teased and Glaint snorted back. If that's your image of me, you offend me Dutch. When Glaint said that, he laughed followed by Dutch. While they both laughed, Glaint took advantage and took a better look at his friend. He seems to be better than last time. But I can't tell. I'm not a psychiatrist. Thanks to the ability brought by the potion, he could detect evils in people's bodies without using his special vision. But ever since he'd seen Dutch, other than his pale skin there was nothing wrong with him. It could even be said that he was healthier than Glaint. Glaint noticed at first glance that his friend's body was quite strong and very healthy. But how much? If only I could know. An idea struck him and he gave himself an imaginary slap. But I am an apothecary. If I use my special vision I can see it. Determined, he took advantage of the fact that he was laughing to take a hand to his hair and run a hand through it. But before the movement was finished, Dutch shook his head and looked at him with a small smile. Tell me my good friend, what have you been doing these days? Something interesting. At the mention of interesting, Glaint froze and realized something. He still hadn't told Dutch that he was now a true Beander. How did I forget about that? There's no need to peek at him, if I tell him I'm an apothecary now he'll let me analyze him all I want. Glaint thought, feeling dumber than a curly-haired baboon. How did he forget to tell him that? Maybe I'm just distracted. Shaking his head, Glaint smiled proudly and put a hand to his chest. I'm glad you asked that my good friend. In fact A horrible chill went up his spine, so strong it was that he swallowed his saliva and couldn't finish. His body began to shake and a cold sweat began to run down his back. He lowered his head and looked at his left hand. It was shaking. Why am I so cold? Glaint thought, confused and a little scared. Hey, Dutch, aren't you cold? His words died in his mouth as he raised his head. His breathing stopped and his pupils shrank. Dutch raised an eyebrow at his friend's question. Glaint, it's almost 27 degrees outside. Dutch replied, confused. He looked normal and there was nothing unusual. But in Glaint's eyes, he was a monster in human flesh. He was barely able to control his body from reacting, and he stayed glued to his seat. Despite how much he wanted to run away and not look back, he stayed still. I'm going to die. If I tell him I'm an apothecary, I'm going to die. Glaint thought, horrified as his back was now completely wet. Ads by PubFuture. He didn't know where that idea had come from or why he was so scared, but he knew it was a reality. The Dutch in front of him looked like a normal person, but now Glaint felt that this was a mask to hide the monster under that human skin. Fear was born in his stomach and coiled tightly, suffocating him like a snake. The smallest mistake and he would die. Knowing that he could not remain silent as this would risk his life, he gathered his courage and spoke, trying to hide his fear as best he could. I attended a Beyander gathering yesterday afternoon. Really? And how was it? Dutch asked in surprise, his mouth hanging slightly. It was an incredible experience. The organizer had a very strong presence that I felt from where I was despite being more than 20 meters away from him. Glaint said with a shaky smile. Dutch nodded, showing an envious expression. You have to take me one of these days, my friend. Maybe, Glaint said with an awkward laugh. The party is quite irregular and I will have to wait a long time to know the next one. He lied as best he could, praying to the goddess that his friend. No. That thing would buy it. At that, Dutch sighed in disappointment. Well, it will be the next one. Glaint gave a shaky smile but didn't comment. Dutch then sighed and asked. Did you at least manage to get something? He asked unhurriedly. Glaint felt like a rope was wrapped around his neck, ready to hang him. He wants to know if I got the apothecary formula. Glaint thought in alarm, detecting the thing's intent instantly. Controlling his fear and nerves, he responded, trying to show as much annoyance as possible. I didn't get anything. There's no trace of the apothecary formula no matter how hard I search. When he said that, Glaint felt his body relax and his nervousness completely disappeared. It was as if that fear had never existed and it was all an illusion in his head. This change so unnerved made him felt lost. Was it all an illusion? All I felt was a game that my mind played. But it was so real. Trying to find an explanation, Glaint came up with the only answer he could find. It's the change brought by the potion. I didn't meditate enough. He even still heard whispers every 3 hours. When I get home I'll meditate until I pass out, Glaint thought, quite scared. Adrian had told him about this whispers and how dangerous they were. While Glaint was in his world, Dutch sighed and nodded. Someday you will find it, my friend, I'm sure of that. Just remember to tell me and maybe I can help you with a missing ingredient. A small shiver went through his body, tiny compared to the previous one, so Glaint didn't give it importance. Smiling at his friend, Glaint returned the same question. And Dutch, after taking a sip of wine, responded. Not much, I've been praying to the moon and talking to a few people about new business. What kind of business, Dutch? Glaint asked as he raised a bit of rib to his mouth. Hee, Dutch chuckled and took another sip of wine. Business was the wrong word, the best thing to call it would be donation. How do you confuse business with donation? Glaint thought, but he didn't ask that but something else. And that would be. Dutch smiled as he lightly shook his glass. An orphanage.